We've now had a weekend to reflect on the Gators' performance at South Carolina in Week 7, most notably quarterback Graham Mertz and the offense's showing in what was seemingly a breakout for the unit in the heroic road victory. But the question is not, did they perform? It's, can they continue it? And is Graham Mertz becoming a dude before our very eyes? I'm Brandon Carroll, the host here at CARROLL'S Cadence, and I'll be breaking down that question along with providing a midseason report card and a brief look into the rest of the year for the University of Florida football program. Make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Obviously, as you can tell from the intro, Graham Mertz, the quarterback at the University of Florida, is our focal point of today's show. I took last week off to rejuvenate myself during the bye, but trust me, I did not forget what I saw from the Gators quarterback in Columbia. He had a coming out party of sorts before the bye week where he finally produced at the level conducive to elevate Florida to a win. If you've watched here on this program before, you'd know that I was somewhere in the middle on Mertz when he arrived at the University of Florida from Wisconsin this offseason. I thought the people saying that he was the worst quarterback in the SEC were way off base. They were loud and wrong. I didn't think that was going to be what he was when he arrived and was able to take over Billy Napier's offense. However, at the same time, I've also expressed that he put a cap on what the offense could do. His strengths were obviously the short and intermediate accuracy, ability to control the offense, decision-making, all of that. All right. His weaknesses, stretching the field with his arm and evading pressure. Two things that Florida had in 2022, but we're going to lose in 2023, going from Anthony Richardson to Graham Mertz. And through 6 weeks, really, that assessment was spot on. That's exactly what he was. He wasn't nearly as bad as the loud and wrong suggested, but he wasn't lighting it up to a point in which the Gators were some prolific passing attack kind of oiled by his leadership, behind his lead. That's not what they were. He was doing what he was asked to do when Billy Napier and co brought him in this offseason, and he was doing so despite an inconsistent run game. So he's arguably doing more. He was pushing Florida in the right direction to come away with some dubs, but he was never being the one to elevate them to that victory. And then Florida traveled to the first of two Columbias as they went to play South Carolina in the cockpit in Week 7. And the notable knocks, the weakness specifically of being able to stretch the field with his arm, being able to target downfield, target the deep levels, they ceased to exist. The light bulb finally turned on for Graham Mertz, and Mr. Mertz had a coming out party. He was 30 for 48 passing, 423 yards, 3 touchdowns, and a game-winning score on the final drive for Florida to seal the deal on a comeback victory, 41-39. He was dealing all day long to lead the Gators to the most well-oiled passing attack it has seen, arguably since Billy Napier arrived at the University of Florida. There were times last year where there were spurts of it from Anthony Richardson when he was clicking. But from a game start to game end perspective, from the first snap to the end, Graham Mertz produced the most efficient and explosive and kind of consistent passing attack the Gators have seen since Billy Napier became the guy at the University of Florida. And sure, there was a little luck involved. They were kind of, there were some things that happened that were outside of Graham Mertz's control that, just like Billy Napier said after the game, Steve Spurrier once said, God smiled on the Gators today. They smiled on the Gators when they were in Columbia. But a little luck was going to be necessary for the Gators to kind of cast out their road demons that we've seen under Billy Napier to this point. Before they went into that game, they were 1-7 and away from the swamp in his tenure. And they had to crawl out of a 10-point hole to be able to come back and beat South Carolina on the road. So sure, there was some luck. The tip pass intended for Ricky Pearsall was caught by Eugene Wilson III. That's the most prominent example. And then you have, Arliss Boardingham making a play on 4th and 11 despite getting the ball behind the sticks, significantly behind the sticks. But when things work out, they work out. And they were working out for Graham Mertz all day, so I don't think you can necessarily knock him for that. But that marks the question. That performance in whole marks the question. Can he sustain that high level of play? Sure he can. Because if you look at the performance, it was a byproduct of him combining the things that he's been asked to do and the things that he is wanted to do. And I think those two are different. Let me explain. He's asked to be a supplement to the offense by taking what the defense gives him and targeting those short and intermediate areas while the run game is the focal point. All right. And if he doesn't do that, he's considered to be underperforming. But there are times when he'll make the smart play and it falls within the criteria of what he's asked to do instead of taking a chance that could potentially elevate this Florida offense to the next level. They want him to do those things, but they're fine with him if he's not. Florida fans want him to do those things, but they're fine with him if he's not, because they'll live with him taking what he's given instead of forcing one in hopes of coming up big, and it meaning they are able to maintain possession and continue operating the offense. They live to play another down. But on Saturday, he did a little bit of both. You saw at times where he'd check it down in order to keep the operation steady, but we also kind of saw him pass up those easy completions to the flats or in that short hook curl area for shots down the field. And specifically, you watch the deep ball to Khalil Jackson, and I think it's a perfect example of that. It was, obviously Florida was battling it out with South Carolina at that point. They had kicked 2 straight field goals. They're trying to go down and get another score before the halftime break in a game that was obviously going to be who can score more points when the game's over. Obviously, that's the goal, but in a game that was going to come down to which offense would sputter first or which offense would sputter to a point where they're not able to maintain the level of scoring needed to win that contest. So you watch this ball to Khalil Jackson, and it's a levels concept to the far side of the field, which means that you have multiple targets operating to the same side, positioned at different yard markers, like at different points on the field. Florida had 4 targets all flooding to that right side, all right, at varying levels, with the potential for any one of them to be the guy who receives the target. All 4 were open, so Mertz really had his pick of who he wanted. He had Trey Wilson as the short option in the flat, Hayden Hansen running free behind Wilson in around the 8 to 10 yard range on a drag. Ricky Pearsall working behind him just a bit further down the field. And then Khalil Jackson working the deep over. And with him working that deep over in previous weeks, you would have seen Mertz take Wilson out in the flat or Hansen instead of letting it develop and then uncorking one down the field. And Ricky occasionally would have gotten that football. Not in the cockpit, not in Williams-Brice Stadium, because we haven't really seen Graham Mertz set his feet and take that deep shot in that scenario all year. He's played it consistently, but you could tell that he was feeling it. So, yeah, he set up and he said, I'm going to take a shot. And he launched a deep ball to Jackson. It was a little bit outside of Jackson's reach until he decided he wanted to go parallel with the ground and come away with one of the nastiest snags I've seen from the Florida team all season. Really, the best snag I've seen outside of Ricky Pearsall's one-handed snag, looking like Jumpman against Charlotte. But the extension from Khalil Jackson was beautiful. And one thing I want to add real quick, y'all remember those practice clips that were coming out about number 22 when, he was, there were guys posting about him saying like, oh yeah, this guy's a stud when he was not on scholarship. Well, that was the first time we've kind of seen those clips come to life. And it made everyone sit up in their seats and say, oh my gosh, this guy might be nice. He could potentially be a dude. Well, he doesn't get that opportunity if Graham Mertz isn't willing to target downfield like he was then. And it's not necessarily in the same situation, but you see it again, just the willingness to take chances and understanding the kind of function of pushing the ball downfield. Because it happens again on the game-winning touchdown toss from Mertz to Ricky Pearsall. He knew where he wanted to go with the football before he even lined up. Before the play, as soon as the play was called, he knew what was going on. He said, this is where I'm going. And he said that on Monday. He told Ricky that he was going to look to him. He was going to move the safety and look to him. All right. And he just knew how South Carolina likes to play defense. And I also knew how South Carolina would like to play defense because I told y'all that the way Florida would be able to move offensively is they were going to exploit that middle of the field in my prediction show. I gave you a little preview of South Carolina's defense, and they don't make many adjustments. This is a South Carolina defense that is very stuck in their ways. And I told y'all that was the area that he wanted to exploit. But for some reason, people don't listen. People aren't subscribing. Actually, they are. Y'all are doing great. I really appreciate everybody that's coming in. I just wanted to kind of pat myself on the back there for understanding that the middle of the field was going to be huge for this Florida team, and it turned out to be the reason that they won this contest, or at least a small reason of why they won this contest. Anyway, he knew Ricky working out of the slot was going to be in a great spot over the middle of the field, so long as he was able to move that deep safety over to the side just a little bit to be able to put that ball into Ricky's arms. He trusted him working one-on-one. South Carolina likes to run a lot of man, so he trusted him to work one-on-one and put that ball in a good spot for them to be able to get the really what was close to being a walk-off game-winning touchdown. So he dropped back, looked to his left, and forces that safety over just a little bit, and then with no reservations. That's the biggest thing to me. The confidence that Graham Mertz was playing with deserves all of the praise, because no reservations, flips his hips and slings one into Ricky, calling game. Game over. They've went up. They've come back from down 10. They are now leading this contest 41-37, before obviously taking a safety to try to roll out the rest of the clock, leaving 3 seconds on, yada, yada, yada. But it's the little nuances of that, of Mertz and his game, that deserves the praise, that deserves the just a credit, because you're really starting to see him settle into this Florida offense, and he's progressively getting better week in and week out. And sure, it was against the SEC's worst defense, so you can sit here and say, oh, well, he's not going to be able to do that against Georgia. You're probably right. You're probably right. He's not going to be able to do that against Georgia. But a lot of what he did isn't a byproduct of playing South Carolina. It's transferable throughout the rest of the year, because it's more than the little things. It's his willingness to take shots downfield. It's his willingness to work out of the pocket, set his feet, and take those, the more than just what the defense is giving him, but create things on his own and kind of expand his game beyond what it's been through the first 6 weeks to that point. Because you're not going to see him, or you're not going to want to see him throw the football 48 times in a single game again, because that's not the formula for this football team to win. But at least he's capable. So if he has to do it, you're willing to put the football in his hands and let him work. They knew he was playing on fire. They knew he was playing in with a little bit of edge to him against South Carolina. He had something to prove, it seemed. And so they said, all right, just go out there and get it. And they let him get it all day long, and he did. They know that he has that ability now. They understand that he has that, capability. And it instills a little bit of trust from Billy Napier in the calls that he makes moving forward, which I think can be very beneficial for this team, despite playing in a rough close to the season, rough stretch of opponents throughout the rest of the year, because you have a quarterback now who might not be a world beater, and I'm not saying he is. I'm just saying, compared to what a lot of people thought that he was going to be, he is exceeding and shattering that ceiling so far. It's something that he has to continue, and it's not me crowning him, but I do think he deserves his flowers for the performance he was able to give on the road in Columbus. Speaking of the closing stretch of the season, I wanted to take a second or a few minutes to reflect on the first half of the Gators campaign, since I wasn't able to, or I didn't want to. I don't know how to say it. I wanted to, but I also thought it'd be good for me to get a refresher mid-year, so that's why I didn't do my shows last week, as y'all well know. But just to take a few to kind of look at this team at the halfway point with a bit of a midseason report card. All right, I don't want to go too in-depth, but I figured I'd give some grades for the 3 phases of the game, the talent that Florida has, and really just an overall assessment of this unit through 7 games. Offensively, I have them at a C+. I think the offensive line has regressed from a season ago, resulting in the regression of the rushing game, which is how Florida is built to play offense. Florida is a team that is built to run the football, or at least wants to be built to run the football. They haven't done that at times this year, which I think has resulted in the unit sputtering, which ultimately, if that unit's sputtering, the entire unit is sputtering as a whole. So statistically, they've been up and down throughout the year, kind of faltered. They rank currently at 46th in the country in total offense, averaging 421 yards per game. That contest against South Carolina really helped that ranking kind of be bolstered. There was a time where they were the worst offense in the SEC. That's no longer the case. But like I said, there was a significant aid from that South Carolina contest where they just put up a lot of points and a lot of yards. All right. So while there may be signs of promise there, it's not necessarily an overall. That's not what I'm gonna look at in this grade because it's a season long grade so far. So because it's been one dimensional at times, with that dimension, the bread and butter faulting, I think that it is average, and it's on the upper end of average because of, you're starting to see a little bit of a passing attack emerge with Arliss Boardingham and Ricky Pearsall and Trey Wilson kind of stepping into their own, with Graham Mertz, obviously, like I said, for the first really good portion of the show, being a dude, starting to be a dude at least, or it looks as if he could be a dude at some point. I think it's hard to give them anything better than a C plus, even with that stellar performance against South Carolina. If they keep producing in a just anywhere similar fashion to what they did against the Gamecocks, I think at the end of the year they could be close to the B plus, B range. So right now, C plus for the Gators offense. Defensively, I'm going to give them a B. I think it's been really good at times and really bad at others. Notably, they've struggled making tackles against the likes of Kentucky and South Carolina. And so that shows that something needs to be reconciled. They need to get back to being able to make tackles the way they did for really the first 4 weeks of the year. Again, against Vanderbilt, they were playing well. But overall, I think this defense has vastly improved from what it was a season ago. So maybe that's influencing how I view this unit under Austin Armstrong, because of how horrid it's been over the past 3 seasons. But it's a front 7-led unit with Jordan Castell spearheading that back end. They've been decent against the run, and until last week, they were one of the top-ranked pass defenses in the country. They've been really stout, honestly, throughout the year as a whole. I know there's a lot of glaring kind of bad. It's a bad taste for a lot of the explosive plays that they've been able to allow this year. But at the same time, you look at this unit and it's been able to get opposing offenses off the field consistently. And even when it's not happening on a drive to drive basis, like against South Carolina, like against Kentucky, I think that the defense has stepped up when it's needed to get the stops. It is, that is necessary in those moments. They got 2 massive stops to be able to give Florida's offense an opportunity to win that game in Columbia a week ago, which is a microcosm of how this unit's performed all year long. So I think B is reasonable because it's been above average, but it's still at a point where steps are needed to be taken and things need to be fixed before I can give them anything further. Special teams, y'all are going to be surprised by this one. Special teams, we got C minus. And before you turn off the channel, before you say this guy doesn't know what he's talking about, Florida special teams sucks, allow me to explain. Yes, this unit has been much maligned over the past few seasons because of the glaring flaws. That's been evident through the first 7 weeks of the year. And I've been vocal about that. If you've watched any of my other shows, you'd know that special teams, I said, if they don't get something right, it's going to come back to haunt them. But since week 3, in all honesty, I think a few weeks ago, if I would have had to do a similar thing, this would have been an F. I would have said, yeah, special teams, horrible. All right. But since week 3, I think that kicker Trey Smack has fixed a lot of issues in the kicking game. That block kicked against South Carolina wasn't his fault. It's hard to get off one when you're playing a man down in protection. It's another example of them putting 5 or 10 players out on the field and it coming back to haunt them. Okay. So just because he had that block kick doesn't disregard everything that he's been able to do for Florida this season. He won Florida its game against Charlotte and played a significant role in that game in week 7 over South Carolina. And then outside of him, you got the coverage units, which have been fine. They haven't allowed anything huge. Return block units have been kind of a big knock just because they've been the one that have really repeated the offenses of having 10 guys on the field at any given time. And then Jeremy Crawshaw, the punter, he is what he is. He has a big leg. He's inconsistent. He struggles to drop the ball inside the 20. But if you're looking for a 73-yard punt, he can give it to you on occasion. So it's like he's been up and down. The really special teams as a whole has been down. But Trey Smack is what elevates them into C minus range for me. And it was close to being a D plus, but I think just because he was able to actually win them a football game coming in Charlotte and honestly probably win them that game against South Carolina a week ago or last week, it moves them into that C- range. And talent and development. I'm not going to give y'all the grade just yet. I'm going to give y'all a bit of a rundown of talent and development. So what I'm looking at here is obviously the evaluations, the pieces that they brought in, the guys that are young or transfers that have not been on the team before and how they're performing to aid this team. I think it's been really good. I think it's been almost great since Billy Napier and co have arrived. And a lot of the young players and transfer talent have taken on major roles for this team this season. And I think the group as a whole, the personnel, the roster is much better than it was a season ago. And I think they've done a good job at progressing the talent that's carried over from the previous regime to be able to kind of make do with what they have at the moment. So, yes, there's still a lot of youth, and there are a handful of spots needing to be overhauled, safety being one of them. Outside of Jordan Castell, you've had Bryce Thornton kind of play a role there, who's been very good as well, but you just there's some pieces and some depth that is needed to progress. And I think that the staff has been adequate at development. So if you put those two together, I'm giving it a B+. I think the talent and that they've brought in has been crucial to their success, their 5-2 record going into the bye. And I think that they've developed some of the talent that they had on the roster previously to play at a higher level than they have in the past. Outside of offensive line, which is a concern with both talent and development, this team is better for having Billy Napier and his staff here at the University of Florida. They are producing at a higher rate, which to me is a promising and worthy of a B+ rating so far. So yeah. And then overall, I think this Florida team sits at a B- on the year for what they've done in the first half of the season. Because if you look at what they're, and I think everything is relative to expectations. Okay. So yes, there's a daunting stretch down the rest of the season. They got clobbered against Kentucky. They got clobbered against Utah. Had a tight game with Charlotte. Obviously, you don't want to see them only win by 2 against South Carolina, but doing so on the road where they've struggled so mightily is always going to be a positive. But just to be able to go into the bye week at 5-2 is better than I initially anticipated and many others initially anticipated. Upset victory over Tennessee is the stamp on this team this year so far. And Tennessee looks as if, despite their collapse in the second half against Alabama, looks as if they are decent. And they're better than I originally gave them credit for this offseason. But the overall product of Florida's team has been comfortably above average as a whole, I believe. I think they are just slightly above average. All right. It's comfortably, but it's also slightly because it's a B-, but it's more towards like the 83. All right. So just having that and having that production from both sides of the ball, we get times where it's a defensive game where they're playing on fire and times where it's an offensive game where they're playing on fire, and then times where it's Tennessee and they're doing both. All right. And as a result, I think they are worthy of a B- rating for their overall showing on offense, defense, special teams, talent and development, coaching, etc. for the 2023 campaign through 7 weeks or through 8 weeks now. And they're going to try to sustain that throughout the rest of the year because the second half of the season is going to be a tough one for Florida. It's going to be tough sledding for the Gators. You got Georgia, Arkansas, LSU, Missouri, and Florida State to round out the regular season. It's going to make it very difficult to move past that 6-win mark on the year. I'm pretty confident in saying that they'll be able to beat Arkansas because I have watched Arkansas and they're not good. Obviously, firing Dan Enos, they're going to try to really lean into KJ Jefferson when they travel to the Swamp after their bye week in week 8 or week 9. So I think they'll give them a little bit, but I'm pretty confident in saying that Florida can take down the Razorbacks in that nooner in Ben Hill Griffin Stadium with the all blacks on and everything like that. But the rest of the way is going to be an uphill climb. You got Georgia, and Georgia's Georgia. They're 24 straight wins, two-time reigning national champions. Once again, looking like one of the best teams in the country with a fast track to another college football playoff appearance. So there's a lot there that Florida's going to be struggling with. But I will say, if there's anything, if you're looking for any type of hope, Gator fans, and I don't want to give you too much hope because I want you to also be realistic. We're about realism on this show. We don't go, we don't give you a slanted approach. But the last 10 times a first-year starter at quarterback for the Bulldogs have played against the Gators, they are 1-9. Jake Fromm is the only one to take down Florida in his first attempt during that stretch. Carson Beck, although he's been really good, he's been a fantastic processor of the offense for Georgia, is in his first start against Florida. Just something to think about, just something to stir on as we get closer to my preview and prediction show and that contest on Saturday. Preview and prediction show will be coming out tomorrow. I'll have a special guest on the show. Make sure to tap in for that one. And then they go to LSU after Arkansas, of course. LSU has an elite offense. It's led by Heisman contender Jaden Daniels, who has produced arguably as the best player in college football. And there's a reason he's a Heisman contender. Arguably the best attack in college football as well for this unit. I think Washington and Oregon are close, but LSU takes the cake that we're at this moment because of how dynamic Daniels has been as both a rusher and a passer. Now, their defense isn't great. It's honestly atrocious. But getting into a shootout in Death Valley is the most distant, desired scenario for Florida. If you could pick, if Doctor Strange could sit here and give you every possible scenario and Florida had to pick through all of them, that is the one at the end of the line. You do not want to get in a shootout against the Tigers, especially in Death Valley against Florida. But there is a very good possibility that could be the case, which is, it should be terrifying for the Gators. And then Missouri, who's sneakily, or really not anymore, but they're still not going to be considered as it by the casuals, the second best team in the SEC East this year. Yeah, I said it. The second best team in the SEC East this year is the Missouri Tigers. And I just want to say something. I apologize to the Missouri Tigers. I wasn't familiar with your game, but I'm very familiar now. And y'all are some dogs. Y'all got it going. Brady Cook and Luther Burden got that offense rolling with several other offensive pieces that are really good. And it's hard to stop this Tigers attack. And another road game, probably going to be earlier in the day, I'd assume. This could be another tough task for Florida to take them down. Missouri rolled over Kentucky on the road, made them, even though they fell down 14-0 early, kind of played into the fact that they had just lost to Georgia by a large amount, to put it lightly. And yeah, Missouri's just looked like a good football team throughout the year. That win over Kansas State in week 3 or week 2, maybe, either way, was a massive boost for this team, and they've been rolling ever since. Lost to LSU at home, but still look really, really good, and they're poised to potentially have a massive contest with Georgia going into next week. And then Florida State, coming at the end of the season, has looked like the best team in the country at times. The best. Not one of the best. The best. But obviously, they've had some ups and downs defensively. Jordan Travis has given you he's been good at times, but then he's also had times where it's like, oh, why did he make that play? So they're really impressive offensively. They have strong units in both lines. I think they are good up front on both sides of the ball, which could give Florida some fits, especially in the run game on both sides. But I do think that one will come a little bit closer than many people may expect initially, just because of the rivalry environment and it being at the University of Florida and it being the final game of the season, potentially to move to 7 wins on the year. Not saying Florida is able to pull out any crazy upset, but I do think that one could be a bit more exciting than people will give it credit for heading into that matchup. And I think because of that, because of those contests, it'll be interesting to see how the end of the year shakes out for the Florida Gators, because it'll likely be a daunting task for Florida as they attempt to equip that 6-win total from a season ago. And I'm not saying it's impossible. And I'm honestly not even saying it's unlikely. I'm just saying it's going to be difficult. So I'm not setting these expectations in stone, even though I really didn't give you expectations. I just told you how good the opponent Florida has coming up. But it's going to be difficult. It's going to be an uphill climb. But hey, who knows? If Graham Mertz keeps hooping, you never know. So like I said earlier, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. And I just wanted to thank all of you for watching this episode of CARROLL'S Cadence. I'll be back tomorrow evening with a special guest, as I kind of teased earlier, to preview and predict the world's largest outdoor cocktail party bout between the top-ranked Georgia Bulldogs and the Florida Gators. So don't miss that. Y'all are the best, and I'm gone.